Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. My name is Sydney, and if you are new here, this is just a place where we can talk about true crime, spooky scary stories, dark history, or anything else I got going on in my brain. It's been a little bit, and so I thought that we could just take some time today to read some more creepypastas because it's just becoming my favorite thing. I just love sitting down with you guys, drinking a little White Claw, and talking about creepypastas. So for this round, I kind of just went and tried to find titles that I hadn't heard of like before, but I just picked everything based on the name. Like I just found names of the stories that I thought were interesting and I was like, let's give her a go. So without any further ado, I have this Surge White Claw, which I tried one before and it tastes just like vodka and nothing else, or just like alcohol taste. Ugh. I don't know if it's just me, but when I have a drink that tastes like too alcohol-y, I guess you could say, I cringe. I don't know how to say it. It just sends a shiver down my spine. I don't know. I'm trying to find a way that I can enjoy this kind of White Claw, but it's just, she's a little much. She looks sweet. She looks nice, but God. Hey friends, it's me, your local neighborhood Sydney, just here to say that today's video, viewer discretion is advised whenever we're reading creepypastas. There's going to be some blood, there's going to be some guts, there's going to be some gore, and we're also going to be talking about themes of self-harm, suicide, things like that. You know how it goes with creepypastas. So please take care of yourself. Maybe skip today's video if you're not super comfortable. There are lots of other videos of mine if you want to watch them. You don't have to, but it'd be cool if you did. Anyway, okay, let's get into today's video. Alrighty, so the first story we're going to be reading today is called Mr. Widemouth. And I picked this one because the title, iconic. I don't know. We have to read it. So without any further ado, let's read Mr. Widemouth. During my childhood, my family was like a drop of water in a vast river, never remaining in one location for too long. We settled in Rhode Island when I was 8, and there we remained until I went to college in Colorado Springs. Most of my memories are rooted in Rhode Island, but there are fragments in the attic of my brain which belong to the various homes we had lived in when I was much younger. Most of these memories are unclear and pointless, chasing after another boy in the backyard of a house in North Carolina, trying to build a raft to float on the creek behind our apartment we rented in Pennsylvania, and so on. But there is one set of memories which remains clear as glass, as though they were made just yesterday. I often wonder whether these memories are simply lucid dreams produced by the long sickness I experienced that spring, but in my heart, I know that they are real. We were living in a house just outside of the bustling metropolis of New Vineyard, Maine, population 643. It was a large structure, especially for a family of 3. There were a number of rooms that I didn't even see in the 5 months we resided there. In some ways, it was a waste of space, but it was the only house on the market at the time, at least within an hour's commute to my father's place of work. The day after my 5th birthday, attended by my parents alone, I came down with a fever. The doctor said I had mononucleosis, which meant no rough play and more fever for at least another 3 weeks. It was horrible timing to be bedridden. We were in the process of packing our things to move to Pennsylvania, and most of my things were already packed away in boxes, leaving my room barren. My mother brought me a ginger ale and books several times a day, and these served the function of being my primary form of entertainment for the next few weeks. Boredom always loomed just around the corner, waiting to rear its ugly head and compound my misery. I don't exactly recall how I met Mr. Widemouth. I think it was about a week after I was diagnosed with mono. My first memory of the small creature was asking him if he had a name. He told me to call him Mr. Widemouth because his mouth was large. In fact, everything about him was large in comparison to his body. His head, his eyes, his crooked ears, but his mouth was by far the largest. "You look kind of like Furby," I said as I flipped through one of my books. Mr. Widemouth stopped and gave me a puzzled look. "Furby? What's a Furby?" he asked. I shrugged. "You know, the toy, the little robot with big ears. You can pet him and feed them, almost like a real pet." "Oh," Mr. Widemouth resumed his activity. "You don't need one of those. They aren't the same as having a real friend. I remember Mr. Widemouth disappearing every time my mother stopped by to check in on me. I lay under your bed, he later explained. I don't want your parents to see me because I'm afraid they won't let us play anymore. We didn't do much during those first few days. Mr. Widemouth just looked at my books, fascinated by the stories and pictures they contained. The third or fourth morning after I met him, he greeted me with a large smile on his face. I have a new game we can play, he said. We have to wait until after your mother comes to check on you because she can't see us play it. It's a secret game. After my mother delivered more books and soda at the usual time, Mr. Widemouth slipped out from under the bed and tugged my hand. We have to go to the room at the end of this hallway, he said. I objected at first, as my parents had forbidden me to leave my bed without their permission, but Mr. Widemouth persisted until I gave in. The room in question had no furniture or wallpaper. Its only distinguishing feature was a window opposite the doorway. Mr. Widemouth darted across the room and gave the window a firm push, flinging it open. He then beckoned me to look at the ground below. We were on the second story of the house, but it was on a hill, and from this angle, the drop was further than 2 stories due to the incline. I like to play pretend up here, Mr. Widemouth explained. I pretend that there is a big, soft trampoline below this window, and I jump. If you pretend hard enough, you bounce back up like a feather. I want you to try it. I was a 5-year-old with a fever, so only a hint of skepticism darted through my thoughts as I looked down and considered the possibility. It's a long drop, I said, but that's all part of the fun. It wouldn't be fun if it was only a short drop. If it were that way, you might as well just jump on a real trampoline. I toyed with the idea, picturing myself falling through thin air only to bounce back to the window on something unseen by human eyes. But the realist in me prevailed. Maybe some other time, I said. I don't know if I have enough imagination. I could get hurt. Mr. Widemouth's face contorted into a snarl, but only for a moment. Anger gave way to disappointment. If you say so, he said. He spent the rest of the day under my bed, quiet as a mouse. The following morning, Mr. Widemouth arrived holding a small box. I want to teach you how to juggle, he said. Here are some things you can use to practice before I start giving you lessons. I looked in the box. It was full of knives. My parents will kill me, I shouted, horrified that Mr. Widemouth had brought knives into my room, objects that my parents would never allow me to touch. I'll be spanked and grounded for a year. Mr. Widemouth frowned. It's fun to juggle with these. I want you to try it. I pushed the box away. I can't. I'll get in trouble. Knives aren't safe to just throw in the air. Mr. Widemouth's frown deepened into a scowl. He took the box of knives and slid under my bed, remaining there for the rest of the day. I began to wonder how often he was under me. I started having trouble sleeping after that. Mr. Widemouth often woke me up at night, saying he put a real trampoline under the window, a big one, that I couldn't see in the dark. I always declined and tried to go back to sleep, but Mr. Widemouth persisted. Sometimes he stayed by my side until early in the morning, encouraging me to jump. He wasn't so fun to play with anymore. My mother came to me one morning and told me I had permission to walk around outside. She thought the fresh air would be good for me, especially after being confined to my room for so long. Ecstatic, I put on my sneakers and trotted out to the back porch, yearning for the feeling of sun on my face. Mr. Widemouth was waiting for me. I have something I want you to see, he said. I must have given him a weird look because he said, It's safe. I promise. I followed him to the beginning of a deer trail which ran through the woods behind the house. This is an important path, he explained. I've had a lot of friends about your age. When they were ready, I took them down this path to a special place. You aren't ready yet, but one day I hope to take you there. 2 weeks after I met Mr. Widemouth, the last load of our things had been packed into a moving truck. I considered telling Mr. Widemouth that I would be leaving. But even at 5 years old, I was beginning to suspect that perhaps the creature's intentions were not for my benefit, despite what he said otherwise. For this reason, I decided to keep my departure a secret. My father and I were in the truck at 4 a.m. He was hoping to make it to Pennsylvania by lunchtime tomorrow with the help of an endless supply of coffee and a 6-pack of energy drinks. He seemed more like a man who was about to run a marathon, rather than one who was about to spend 2 days sitting still. No, that's okay, wait. That's for real though, because I just took a trip to Cleveland, which is not even that far of a drive, but I was like planning for that shit. I was like, I need to hydrate. I need some snackies. This is an adult thing that I didn't realized was an adult thing until now, but yeah. Early enough for ya, he asked. Also a dad thing. That's hilarious. Okay. Early enough for ya, he asked. I nodded and placed my head against the window, hoping for some sleep before the sun came up. I felt my father's hand on my shoulder. This is the last move, son. I promise. I know it's hard for you, as sick as you've been. Once Daddy gets promoted, we can settle down and you can make friends. I opened my eyes as we backed out of the driveway. I saw Mr. Widemouth's silhouette in my bedroom window. He stood motionless until the truck was about to turn onto the main road. He gave me a pitiful little wave goodbye, steak knife in hand. I didn't wave back. Years later, I returned to New Vineyard. The piece of land our house stood upon was empty except for the foundation, as the house had burned down a few years after my family left. Out of curiosity, I followed the deer trail that Mr. Widemouth had shown me. Part of me expected him to jump out from behind a tree and scare the living bejesus out of me, but I felt that Mr. Widemouth was gone, somehow tied to the house that no longer existed. The trail ended at the New Vineyard Memorial Cemetery. I noticed that many of the tombstones belonged to children. Ooh. Okay. Why was that one of the best ones we've read? That was really good because it wasn't too like, oh my God, so spooky ooky, but like, it's more of like a psychological thing. That was interesting. And I thought that one was written really well because usually, like, no offense to people that write creepypastas, but sometimes, and it's not just because I'm drinking, it's like super hard to read because it's either like too wordy or it's like written kind of funky. This one was written very well. And yeah, I enjoyed that one a lot. Okay, I feel like this would be much better if you either added like maybe just like a little bit of like a simple syrup or maybe like some Sprite or like some 7-Up. Something to zhuzh it up because all I'm getting is like bubbly alcohol, you know? I don't know, maybe I'm just a pussy. So this next one is called Charles Bonnet syndrome. And again, I just like the name kind of piqued my interest. I suffer from a condition called Charles Bonnet syndrome, or visual release hallucinations, if you want to get more technical. It's a condition that's far more common than you might realize. It's estimated that as many as half of people with gradual loss of vision will experience one or more bouts over their lifetime. Yet I'm willing to bet that most of you have never heard of it. The reason for that is because most sufferers are scared to tell anybody what we experience. I know I was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Andrew and I'm 26. 2 years ago, I woke up with awful blurred vision. Every single edge and detail clouded as if somebody had smeared Vaseline on a camera lens. It never got better. I was scared then and got over to Dr. Harper's surgery as fast as I could, suddenly needing to take a cab rather than to climb in the car I'd driven without incident ever since I'd bought it 3 years prior. The doctor did some tests, asked me some questions, and then gave me the diagnosis that changed my life forever. Diabetes. Type 1. He explained that I would need to take insulin shots with every meal, that eating the wrong foods without monitoring my blood sugar could see me drop into a coma, or worse. Then he got to my eyes. Andrew, your diabetes has resulted in maculopathy. Do you know what that is? I shook my head dumbly, already reeling with the shock of my diagnosis, and Dr. Harper went on. It's when the diabetes affects the blood vessels at the back of your eye, blocking them and causing them to leak into the macula, the central part of your retina that helps you perceive color and fine detail. When these blood vessels leak into the macula, it can cause significant damage. With a lump in my throat, I asked, "Okay, so how do we make this better?" I couldn't see Dr. Harper's face properly when he spoke, but his tone of voice was enough to tell me what I'd been dreading. "I'm sorry, Andrew," he replied gravely. "Perhaps if we'd caught this a little sooner, we might have had some treatment options available to us. But I'm afraid the damage has been pretty extensive. We can take steps to arrest the development of the condition, but I'm afraid it's irreversible." I felt as if my world had just come crashing down around me. I was just 24. Still at my physical peak, I was active, playing basketball and cycling a couple of times a week. And now my health, my body, and my sight had been taken from me. The first 6 months were tough. I broke up with my girlfriend, a sweet girl called Holly, who tried to make it work but couldn't because I was so damn angry all the time. I lost my job because if there's one thing an architect needs, it's his eyes. I even fell out with a lot of my friends, making excuses not to meet with them until they just stopped asking. In truth, it was jealousy on my part. Envy that they got to keep on living while everything I'd hoped for had been snatched away. I became a recluse, never leaving my apartment, barely bothering to wash or shave or get dressed every day. I was so sure that my life was over, I stopped even trying to live it. I was an asshole. It took me a long time to realize this, but in the end, it was the nurse assigned to visit me at home, a tall, no-nonsense, experienced woman called Lois, who brought this to my attention. "You're an asshole," she said. "What?" I gasped, shocked at her language. "So you've got diabetes. Do you know how many people do?" she asked. And then before waiting for my answer, she continued, "Do you think they all hide in their apartments, refusing to get on with their lives? Losing your vision is a terrible thing, and you do have my sympathy. But Andrew, it is no excuse to give up." "But you don't," I argued, trying to defend myself, but she hadn't finished. "Understand?" she growled. "One of the bravest men I know was paralyzed from the neck down when he was just a child, and he hasn't given up. You can do so much more with your life, and you have people that want to help you do that, but you can't even be bothered to shave that ugly fucking beard off. Stop being a crybaby and make a fucking difference." Of course, it didn't happen overnight, and I argued with her. I was furious at her blunt intensity and told her to leave. I said I'd tell her superiors, but she laughed and told me I wouldn't. "You won't, because you're a smart guy and you've got too much pride for that," she said. "I'll see you next week." That night, I shaved. I opened my curtains and actually looked around. Things were blurry, but when I actually looked, I could see things scattered around my home, the mess I'd let it become. When Lois came back the following week, the place was tidy. I was clean-shaven, dressed. I'd even attempted to comb my hair. She didn't say anything about it, didn't mention the argument of the week before, but she took me out for coffee down the street. She guided me along the sidewalk to the coffee shop, talking to me, reassuring me. It was daunting. Even though it was less than a block away, I felt so proud when I got there. We talked, me and Lois. I think I even laughed. Afterward, she walked me home, and then, when she helped me back inside, she said, "It's nice to meet you at last, Andrew." That day was the beginning of my new life. I moved to a new apartment, a ground floor place, and joined a group of other young people with visual impairments. I made friends. I got out every day, even if it was just a short walk, but I made a point of seeing what I could of the world. I bought what I could, but the Sawyers, the old couple that ran the local store, would bring my groceries by once a week. Clark's a gruff old coot, so he refuses to coddle me, and he's told me that he respects me for being like I am, for maintaining my independence, for not giving up. From a guy like him, that's one of the sweetest things I've ever heard. Things were going so well. Then, 1 year ago, it started. I walked into my living room, a mug of coffee in hand, and I saw a Victorian funeral carriage stood right there on my rug, complete with 2 huge, proud horses, adorned with long black plumes in their bridles. They stood perfectly still, while the driver, a small bearded man in period costume and a top hat, fidgeted with the reins and peered at me expectantly. Bizarrely, they were far clearer than the usual blurry shapes that I could see. I damn near pissed my pants. I dropped the cup, spilling the scalding hot coffee over my bare feet, jumping backwards with a cry of pain and alarm. When I returned my attention to the horse and carriage, they were gone. At that moment, I wondered if I had gone mad. Apparently, most of us do, which is understandable. How would you feel if you'd seen that exact same thing right there in your home? Unless you're Jack the Ripper, I imagine many of you do not have a coach and horses just lying around. I certainly didn't. Eventually, after much quiet swearing to myself and more than a little self-delusion, I managed to convince myself that I had not seen what I thought I had, that it was merely a very vivid daydream. This seemed to work, and I got on with living, even if I entered that same room a little more cautiously in the days that followed. And finally, I forgot about it. 2 weeks later, I saw a giant, floating, swirling orange ball in my bathroom. I damn near pissed myself again. I stood there staring at this bizarre, rotating, levitating globe that was a little larger than a beach ball, hanging in midair over my tub. Opened mouth for a full 10 seconds before finally screwing my eyelids tightly closed and whispering to myself, "That isn't there. That isn't there." After 5 seconds, I opened my eyes again. It wasn't there. Honestly, compared to the loss of my vision, the prospect of losing my wits was so much more terrifying. I'd fought against adversity and took pride in the fact that I am not just a survivor, but somebody who is living his own life. How could I do that if I was insane? I barely slept that night, and I remained jumpy for days afterwards. Any sign of movement or any unfamiliar shape would set my pulse racing, would cause me to doubt whether it was truly there. It was the toughest time I'd ever been through, worse even than the time after I was diagnosed with diabetes. At least when Dr. Harper had told me about my diabetes, I had a definite prognosis. I was given facts by a medical professional. My affliction was physical, it had a name, and most important, it had a treatment plan. This was something else. My own mind had turned against me. My senses and perception of reality had become twisted and unreliable. It's only when you're in that position that you realize just how terrifying it is. Your senses and the way in which your brain interprets them are your only true defense against danger. You perceive danger and you avoid it, preventing your body from becoming harmed. Lois picked up the problem first, noticing my skittish manner. She asked what was wrong, if I needed to talk about anything, but I told her no, I was fine, but I hadn't been sleeping well. The last part was true. I hadn't been able to sleep a wink. Just the very thought of being institutionalized, spending the rest of my days a sedated, blue pajama-clad zombie in a white room with only the echoing cries of my fellow inmates for company, it terrified me beyond measure. But what was the alternative? Live life as a risk to myself and others? Ultimately, I chose to ignore it. I reasoned that if I was able to function around other people without them realizing what was going on, that was good enough. A full month passed before the next incident, and I really did think that maybe I'd put this whole mess behind me. With every passing day, my confidence had grown, so that Wednesday morning when I stepped out onto the sunny street, I felt pretty carefree. Each Wednesday, I'd treat myself to a latte down at Joe's, the same coffee shop that I'd visited with Lois. It was a custom that gave me a great deal of pleasure, one that had seen me forge friendships with other regulars, as well as the staff, including Joe himself. As I made my way down the street, white stick in hand, I glanced about me, taking in the colors and shapes of the world around me. I enjoyed the feel of the sun on my face and the sounds of the birds singing. It was a good day, and then I saw them. A party of pilgrims, 6 of them, all dressed in settler-era attire, sitting cross-legged on the asphalt. They didn't look at me. Instead, they were all engaged in a heated yet strangely silent conversation. I froze, staring at them. Still they argued, gesticulating furiously at one another. However, I couldn't hear the angry voices, despite the fact that they must have been screaming at one another. Paralyzed by shock, the white stick fell from my numb fingers, clattering onto the sidewalk. I turned to leave, desperate to flee from the haunting sight of the colonists in the road, but I was so panicked, in such a hurry, that I stepped on my cane. It rolled underfoot, and before I knew it, I pitched over, tumbling onto the hard ground below. I didn't quite break my fall in time, banging my cheek hard on the floor and skinning my palms. I heard a cry from a passerby, a friendly, concerned woman who rushed by my side. She knelt beside me, helping me up, applying a Kleenex to my throbbing cheek, which she informed me was now bleeding. I tried to tell her that I was okay, that there was nothing to worry about, but this good Samaritan insisted on driving me to Dr. Harper's office to get my injuries looked at. Now that I think back on it, I'm pretty sure that she knew my obvious distress had nothing to do with the fall. At the time, I was embarrassed and angry, but now I realize I owe her a debt of gratitude. Without her intervention, I don't know how much longer this would have gone on before I cracked up and ended in an asylum after breaking down through sheer stress. Andrew, why don't you tell me what happened? Dr. Harper asked, gently dabbing at my cheek with a disinfectant. I explained that I'd just lost my balance and that no harm was done, but I think he saw my underlying agitation. He didn't press or force the matter. He simply asked what might have caused my clumsiness. Then he asked how I'd been as of late. When I'd finished mumbling my way through the most non-committal answer I could muster, he placed a gentle, reassuring hand on my shoulder. Andrew, he repeated gently, why don't you tell me what happened? I burst into tears. I told him how scared I was, how I'd fought so hard for my independence, and now I knew it would be taken from me. He listened patiently, and then asked me to tell him why I ever thought of that. I paused then, took a deep breath, and thought about it. This was the point of no return. But really, what other options did I have? So with tears running down my cheeks, I told Dr. Harper everything. I told him about the horse and carriage, the orange globe, and the pilgrims. I told him how I'd been living each day in fear, how terrified I was of losing my mind. Dr. Harper thought for a while, and then he said, Andrew, I don't think you're losing your mind. A sense of relief at that moment was so powerful it overwhelmed me, rendering me speechless. You say that even though you've seen these things, you've never heard any noise from them. Have you ever detected any odors or experienced any other physical sensations, such as touching them? I shook my head no, and he patted my shoulder once again. Andrew, have you heard of Charles Bonnet syndrome? He asked. Charles who? I asked, confused by this sudden, unexpected turn of conversation. Okay, let me explain, Dr. Harper said kindly. Charles Bonnet was a Swiss naturalist who was born in the 1700s. He discovered a curious condition in his elderly grandfather, who was nearly completely blind due to cataracts. The old man regularly experienced visual hallucinations, including random patterns and even people and places. Sound familiar? Yes, I replied, still confused. Am I suffering from dementia? No, Andrew, not at all, Dr. Harper reassured me. Do you know how perception works? In layman's terms, your eyes take in light via the iris and the pupil, which is then processed via the retina and translated into electrical signals which are decoded by the brain, which simply organizes these signals into a recognizable image. With me so far? I nodded, finally starting to understand. When the retina becomes damaged, such as those who have undergone macular degeneration, those signals become warped and jumbled, Dr. Harper went on. The brain still receives them, so it does its job, translating these distorted signals into an image. It kind of fills in the gaps for you. Sometimes it fills these gaps with colors, patterns, creatures, and places that aren't present. And this is called Charles Bonnet syndrome. I nearly wept with relief. So I'm not mad, I cried. No, not at all, the doctor replied. This is an entirely physical condition. Your mind is in full working order. If you were suffering from any form of mental illness, your delusions wouldn't be limited to just one sense. You'd hear these interlopers, smell them, even feel them. This is a condition solely related to your eyes, not your brain. As I left Dr. Harper's office, I felt as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Sure, my vision was still an issue, but now I knew it was only a problem with my eyes, not my mind. I knew I could handle the situation, and I was ready to face the world again. Since then, I've seen plenty of weird visions. I saw a huge waterfall in the park, complete with a hazy mist and butterflies flitting around it. I saw a Native American warrior, complete with a huge feather headdress, sitting on a stool at the counter of the coffee shop. I saw an intricate and quite impossible statue of scaffolding crisscrossing the entire front of my apartment block. Hell, on the 4th of July last year, I even saw a great swooping green dragon in the sky, twisting and cavorting through the air overhead. All looked utterly and completely real. Yet, now I knew they were just a simple trick of my eyes. They were no longer disturbing. In fact, I actually came to quite enjoy them, even looking at them as a unique and entertaining little show or work of art that existed purely for my pleasure and nobody else's. I came to welcome them. Then, a month ago, I saw her. It was nighttime. It's always at nighttime when I see her, and I was just getting ready for bed. I walked into the kitchen to get myself a glass of water and actually cried out in alarm when I spotted the figure in the corner. She was tall, by far the tallest woman I'd ever seen, and even though she stood hunched, she still had at least 6 inches on me. I was used to seeing characters in dated and bizarre dress, but this was different somehow. It didn't seem like an outfit from any one time. Instead, a bizarre mismatch of items. She wore a tuxedo jacket, figure-hugging in black, tailored to the female body shape, over a dirty old ruffled dress shirt. To complete the ensemble, she wore a bright red bow tie. On her hands, which she held out on either side as if shrugging, or maybe feeling for the rain, she wore dirty white gloves. Her fingers were disproportionately long, almost spidery, and occasionally they twitched, as if she longed to grip and squeeze something in them. On her lower half, she wore shorts, the same crimson as her bow tie, over opaque black nylons. Her legs were long, attractive, if truth be told, the legs of a dancer. She also wore red heels, the same hue as her shorts and bow tie, but they sparkled and shimmered, bringing to mind Julie Garland's ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz. As strange as this ensemble was, I couldn't tear my eyes from her face. Most of it was obscured by a jaunty bowler hat, tipped and tilted to hide her eyes and nose. But beneath the brim of her hat, I could see the deathly pale skin of her face, and a grin that sent shivers down my spine. It was wide. Too wide, with entirely too many teeth. A smile is meant to be an expression of warmth. It's meant to feel welcoming and benevolent. But the look on this woman's face oozed malice. It felt much like the sort of glee I'd expect from a snake as it corners a rat. However, the thing that startled me the most was that she had a third arm sprouting from her back, curled up and over her head like a scorpion's tail. Okay, I thought he was going into this being like, I saw this beautiful woman and she came to me in one of these hallucinations and we fell in love. But this is fucked up. Yeah, she had super spidery arms and just a third leg. Unrealistic expectations for women, I tell you what. It was longer than any arm should be, and the hand only had 3 fingers, like a claw. It was pointed straight at me, and as I swore in dismay and stumbled sideways, it seemed to track my movement. I stood staring at the creepy figure for a few seconds, trying to get my head around the situation. She just stood there in the corner, grinning back. Finally, I realized that this was just another of my hallucinations and breathed an audible sigh of relief. One of the tricks I've picked up over the months of suffering from Charles Bonnet syndrome is to break the line of vision towards whatever stimulus is causing my brain to interpret the images into the hallucination. Think of it like restarting a faulty computer, how refreshing the system debugs it. To this end, I close my eyes and count to 5. Then, when I reopen them, the hallucination is gone. So, as I stare at the horrifying, malformed figure in my kitchen, I knew that to make the image go away, I simply had to close my eyes. I'll be honest here. When I counted to 5, I hesitated a little before opening my eyes. If I'd opened my eyes and she'd still been stood there, smiling that wicked smile at me, I think I might have had a heart attack. She wasn't, and I breathed another long sigh of relief, fetched my glass of water, and went back to bed. The tall woman haunted my thoughts in the days after I saw her. She was different from the other visions I had. Somehow, she felt more real. It was this agitation that my buddy Jason picked up on when we met for lunch the following Friday. Jason was one of those same friends I'd tried to drive away shortly after I lost my vision. Yet, he refused to give up on me, continuing to get in touch week after week. Good friends are hard to come by, but great friends, the ones who will be by your side for life, are even rarer. Jason, God bless his kind heart, is one of the latter. You've got to tell me what's going on, dude, he said as we sat over pizza. What do you mean? I asked, trying to brush it off. You're so distracted, it's like you're looking for something in here all the time. You've eaten 1 slice of pizza in the time it's taken me to eat 4. So I repeat, you've got to tell me what's going on, Jason said, waving a slice of pizza around for emphasis. It's nothing, I replied, feeling a little stupid. I just had a hallucination a couple of nights ago that really got to me. I thought you were cool with those now, he asked, putting down the piece of pizza. Yeah, I am. I was, but this one's different, I replied, resigned to talk about it. She scared me. She? Jason asked, his interest clearly piqued. Tell me about it. So I did. I described the tall woman and how she appeared to me. I explained that unlike any of my other hallucinations, she felt more real, and that she was the first to feature such a weird and unsettling mutation. Sure, I'd seen smaller versions of people in the past, but the extra appendage and impossibly distorted face were something that I had yet to encounter thus far. I think it was that, combined with the unnerving, expectant stance, that had disturbed me the most. So, Jason said after I'd finished, you said she had great legs? Shut up, you asshole, I laughed, throwing my napkin at him. No, seriously, I get it, man, Jason replied, passing the napkin back to me. If I walked into a room and a giant mutant was waiting for me, it'd scare the shit out of me too. But you know what caused you to see this. It's like the coachman and that waterfall you saw. It's a condition that you know you have and one that you know you have to deal with, okay? I know, I replied. Thanks, man, you're right. I did feel better, too, so I smiled at him, took a big bite of my pizza, and changed the subject, asking him about a psycho ex, a conversation he was all too happy to dive into. The next time I saw the tall woman, just under a week later, I was brushing my teeth. I was stood at the wash basin, brushing away, when I spotted a figure in the mirror. She was out in the dark hallway, peeking around the door behind me. That same sinister grin I had seen before stretched her narrow face into a distorted grimace. The dirty bowler hat pushed down over her eyes once again. Each of those 3 long spidery hands gripped the door frame. As crazy as this sounds, it felt like she was trying to avoid being spotted. I spun around, my heart thumping in my chest, my breathing ragged in my throat. She wasn't there. Of course she wasn't there. The doorway was empty. I tiptoed forward hesitantly, trying to look around the doorframe into the hallway without actually sticking my neck out into its shadowy confines. The seconds ticked by as I drew closer and closer. I couldn't see anything, so finally, with a whisper of self-affirmation, I stepped out of the bathroom. The hallway was empty, as well as the rest of my apartment. I was shaken again. This was the first time I'd seen hallucination and reflection, and I wasn't even sure I'd actually seen it. Now, as I sit here writing this, knowing what was to follow, I think I thought that I was trying to protect myself, to shield myself from the truth. I was an idiot. A full fortnight passed without incident. Sure, I saw a flash of color one day, a dancing yellow lightning bolt that zigzagged back and forth on the street outside my apartment. But that was exactly the sort of thing I'd expect to come from my condition. It was exciting, otherworldly, but it wasn't scary. Not like she was. The night that changed the way I viewed the tall woman, last night, I'd been out and had a couple of drinks. I met the other guys with visual impairments for dinner, and we ended up at a bar afterwards. I wasn't hammered, but we got through plenty of beers between us, and by the time I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt decently lightheaded. It took me a while to make it home, laughing and talking to a couple of other guys from our group as we strolled along. It had been a great evening. It was probably the last truly good one I'll ever have. I bid the other guys goodnight and, fumbling with my key, let myself in. With swaying steps, I strolled into my hallway, slamming the door a little too loudly behind me. I took off my jacket, hung it on the hook by the door, and then hit the light switch. She was waiting at the end of the hallway, all three hands held aloft into claws, reaching for me, that same maddening, malevolent grin on her pale face. I swore again, louder than ever, actually jumping back a step, recoiling from the impossibly tall and terrifying figure lying in wait in my own home. The tall woman didn't move. She just stood there, staring and smiling at me. I stared back, but I sure as hell didn't smile. Jesus Christ, I muttered under my breath. You know how you can feel a little paranoid after a few beers? That feeling of non-specific post-alcohol dread? Imagine that, combined with a giant grinning mutant woman suddenly appearing in your home. Suffice it to say, it was very, very, very uncool. I don't need this, I sighed and closed my eyes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When I opened my eyes, her face was just a foot from my own, grinning wider than ever. She dashed the length of the hallway and was now stood so close that her long, grasping arms were on either side of me, her fingers twitching and clawing at the air around my face. I could see her chest heaving as if she was actually laughing silently at my attempts to dismiss her, as if the thought that I could ever be free of her was amusing. I screamed a full-body shriek of terror and actually dropped to my knees, covering my head as if to fend off an expected blow. It never came. I stayed there on my knees for a moment, gasping for breath, and then I was on my feet, and I turned and ran out of the apartment, out of the building, and onto the street. I stood there, shivering, terrified beyond reason, without a clue as to what I should do next. Finally, I pulled my phone from my pocket, and I made a phone call. "Hey, Andy, what's up?" Jason asked. "Jason, I need you to come here," I said, sobbing. Jason didn't ask why, didn't complain. Instead, he simply replied, "I'm on my way." Less than 20 minutes later, his car pulled up outside, and he dashed over to the steps outside my building where I was sitting, shivering. He threw his jacket over my shoulders and asked what happened, his voice filled with concern. "She's in there," I stammered. "The tall woman. She's back." Okay, he said, gently helping me to my feet. "Come on, man. Let's go in there and check it out." I wish I could say that I was brave when we went inside, but I'd be lying. I cowered behind Jason, one hand on his shoulder as we made our way through my home. Of course we didn't find a thing. We're talking a giant mutant woman in a poky little one-bedroom apartment. Where the hell was she going to hide? Finally, after we'd checked every room in the house twice, I had to admit that she was gone. "I'm so sorry, man," I apologized, feeling genuinely stupid. "I got scared and I'm sorry, man." Hey, forget about it, buddy, Jason said. So, I'm here now. Where do you keep your booze? Half a bottle of bourbon later, we are both feeling pretty talkative. She's, just kind of different, I tried to explain. I get it, he said. It's like you saw something bad and you feel bad and that's bad. He didn't get it. No, she's different, I explained. I've never had a repeat hallucination before, and they've never been, scary, She's not like the others. Dude, Jason said, taking another sip of bourbon, you've got, Charles Bonnet syndrome, and that makes you see shit, so... He waved his hands in the air like a magician who had just performed a trick. I know. No, listen, Andy, he said. It makes you see shit. It's just your eyes, yeah? You didn't hear anything. You didn't feel anything. This is how that stuff goes. It's your eyes. And I know it's scary, man, but you've been through, hell and high water in your life so far. You're tough. One of the toughest, bravest guys I know. And you can handle some creepy hallucination, bitch. I laughed. I couldn't help it. She's a very creepy hallucination bitch, though, dude. He laughed too, and we both took a drink. That could help, he said, his voice thoughtful. What, drinking? I asked. No. Well, yes, it does, he giggled. I mean, demystifying her. You should give her a name. Something stupid, so she's not scary. I've got to say that as much as I like creepy hallucination bitch, it's a bit of a mouthful, I laughed. Yeah, I get that, he replied. Suddenly something he said came back to me. How about Helen? I suggested. Helen high water. Awesome, he said, then raised his glass. Here's to Helen, buddy. To Helen, I smiled and drained my glass. Jason spent the night on my sofa, mainly because he had drinking too much to even think about getting behind the wheel of a vehicle. But honestly, I think the reason he drank so much was so he'd have an excuse to stay and keep an eye on me. I'm glad he did. Knowing that he was there made me feel safer, and I was able to get some sleep. It gave me a sense of security to know that if the strange vision I had just christened Helen was to appear again, I'd be able to call on him for support. This morning, we both needed support. Feels like a mule kicked me in the head, dude, he groaned when I made my way into the living room. Yeah, I replied, my own head thumping. Joe's? Joe's, he replied firmly and staggered to his feet. As we drank strong black coffee and ate muffins, we didn't talk much. Finally, Jason broke the silence. So, you feel cool now? He asked, mouth still full of blueberry muffin. I nodded. Yeah, I think so. Not still freaked out about you-know-who? He asked. Helen? I responded with a smile. No, I don't really think I am. I reckon I can handle some creepy hallucination, bitch. Good, he laughed, giving me a hearty pat on the back. That's cool, man. I bet you can. Now, as I sit here, cowering in my bathroom, too scared to go into my apartment, I know we are both wrong about everything. Remember how earlier I told you that the thought of being institutionalized, that the very thought of losing my grasp on reality was the most terrifying thing I could imagine? Now I'd welcome that, because the alternative is far, far worse. After breakfast, I'd said goodbye to Jason, and he climbed into his car and drove away. The day passed without incident, and when Lois stopped by this afternoon, she even commented on how upbeat I seemed. You got a lady in your life? She asked casually. I laughed at that, wondering what she'd think if she knew the truth. Yeah, I chuckled, something like that. Good for you, she sniffed. Make sure you treat her right. That tickled me even more, and I had to bite my lip. Sure, I replied. I'll do my best. Tonight, still a little wiped from the exertions of the previous evening, I decided to turn in early. I brushed my teeth, washed my hands and face, and got changed. Finally, I fetched a glass of water and walked into my bedroom. I climbed into bed and instantly felt so relaxed. Within mere seconds, I was ready for sleep. That sudden overwhelming drowsiness that comes when you've spent the whole day keeping sleep at bay. I decided that resistance was futile and sat up to switch off the light. I nearly didn't see her, but as I reached for the switch, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. My heart leaped into my throat as I turned to the foot of my bed. The tall woman was crouching there, her grinning face staring at me from just beyond my feet. So many teeth. Her long, slender fingers spread out over my blankets, twitching slightly as she gripped the end of my bed. Slowly, excruciatingly so, Her third misshapen arm came into view over her shoulder, joining her other hands on my bedding. I froze, utterly petrified. I was at a crossroads here, arriving at a pivotal moment that had been coming for some time. But this time, I'd had enough. "You don't scare me anymore," I said, my voice filled with defiance and anger. "I'm not letting you do this to me." I reached across to the light switch. "Good night, Helen," I said triumphantly, then flicked it, plunging the room into darkness. I laid there, a sense of tremendous pride surging through me, and I grinned to myself in my warm, comfortable bed, overjoyed at the emotional victory of overcoming my own fear. And then it happened. The thing that led me here. Something that turned my blood to ice water and my bowels to jelly. "Good night, Andrew," her rasping voice hissed from the darkness. That's fucked up. What does that even mean? This could mean one of two things for our friend Andrew. It means either A, he does now have auditory hallucinations as well as visual hallucinations, so he's actually going crazy. That's one thing. Or he's being like haunted by something, like a spirit or a ghost. Either way, that's not the vibe. Poor Andrew. God damn. I'm like shook after that last one. Like, that was such a slow burn that I'm like, my brain is dead. So we're going to try to read this last one together, and this is called The Living History Project. One of my least favorite parts about being a middle school history teacher is the bullshit living history assignments that we give at the end of every school year. Kids are supposed to sit with their grandparents and videotape, voice record, or transcribe their oldest memories for posterity. I've been doing this for 17 years. And when I collected the project this time around, I assumed they would all be just as dull, if not duller, than usual. This had not been a particularly bright class. I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and prepared for a long night of, "I only owed 2 pairs of pants when I was your age," and "my brother got beat with a newspaper for hitting a baseball into the neighbor's yard." And of course, those projects were peppered with innocent, old person comments that were so horribly sexist and racist that you just had to laugh. Now, I had this girl in my class whom I will call Olivia. She was pudgy, quiet, and proved herself a consistent B student. I expected her project to be as unremarkable as her, and perhaps that's why I was so profoundly disturbed by what I witnessed that night. Olivia had submitted 2 discs for some reason, so I began with the one marked interview. My screen hiccuped twice before I saw a grainy image of a living room that came into view. The place was a hoarder's hell. Olivia was curled up in an armchair, clutching a notebook and looking like a scared animal. Across from her sat a somber man, smoking a cigarette and staring at her expectantly. "Go ahead," a woman's voice whispered from behind the camera. Olivia's owlish eyes flashed towards the screen, then back to the man. "I'm here with my great-uncle Stephen," she began almost inaudibly. "He's going to tell us about his oldest memories from being in the army." Great-uncle Stephen looked like he'd rather be in a goddamn trench at the moment, but he waited patiently for the questions to begin. Not surprisingly, Olivia read verbatim from the suggested question sheet I had handed out to the students. He answered her curtly. Once or twice, I heard her mother whispering, "Speak up, Olivia," from behind the camera. So I was intrigued when Olivia set down the notebook and asked, "Did you like being in the army?" That was totally off script. Great-uncle Stephen emitted a chain smoker's wheeze. "Nope, glad to get out of my town, though." "Where did you go?" "Balkans." "Uh-huh," she said. I doubted she knew where Balkans were, and my suspicion was confirmed when she asked, "Was Bacchus very different from here?" "Yes." Mom cleared her throat from behind the camera, perhaps encouraging Great-uncle Stephen to be a little more forthcoming. But Olivia seemed genuinely interested. "Uncle Stephen," she asked, "what's your very worst memory from the army?" The old man crushed his cigarette in the ashtray, then slowly lifted himself out of the chair. "I'll be back," he mumbled, and the camera cut off. When the screen flashed back on, everything was the same, except Great-uncle Stephen had several pieces of paper in plastic sleeves laid atop all the crap sitting on his coffee table. One he held in his hand. "I was a kid when I was enlisted," he said, looking at Olivia. "Your brother's age," he told her. Olivia nodded. "I never saw combat. Both of my deployments were to cities in Eastern Europe that had been destroyed by civil wars. Everything was a mess. I felt like a janitor, for fuck's sake. Mom coughed. Great Uncle Stephen sighed and looked at his paper. My unit was assigned to a school that had been obliterated by all the violence. Broken windows, caved-in rooms, and for some reason, the part that got to me the most was that the school had been like this for years before we had gotten there. No one had lifted a finger to fix it. I saw kids walk by it on their way to go beg for money or whatever shit they did. The camera dipped towards the floor as I heard the mom whisper harshly at Great Uncle Stephen. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but it wasn't hard to imagine. "Do you want to hear this goddamn story or not?" I heard him bark back in response. "Then you better let me tell it how I want." "Mom," Olivia chimed, "please stop interrupting. Are you presenting this in front of the class?" "No, Mom, we're just handing it in to the teacher." I'm sure he's heard the word shit before, Great Uncle Stephen contributed helpfully. I wasn't a he, as a matter of fact, but other than that, the statement was accurate. The camera was lifted, and after a couple of blurry focus adjustments, the shot was the same as before. "I'm talking too much anyway," he grumbled. He lifted the piece of paper in his hand close to his face. "In the basement, I found this letter. I didn't know what it said, but I had a buddy of mine translate it. So I'm going to read it now, and then I'll tell you what I saw in the basement." A chill ran down my spine. Mom zoomed into Great Uncle Stephen and his letter. His hands trembled as he held it up. This is what he read. "Dear Sir, I've never loved my country. So many of these skirmishes are born from patriotism, a power struggle for the shards of a once great empire. But I do not care what name my home has on a map. This fighting is senseless, and I stay as far away from it as I can. It was not the attacks and disorganized violence that took the lives of my wife and child. It was illness. Mercifully, it happened quickly for the baby. Naja suffered for longer. I watched them in horror, knowing that I could do nothing for them. My only solace is that I was there for them every step of the way. I stopped going to work one day, and no one came after me. I doubted they noticed I was gone. Since the school was simply across the field, visible from my window, it would have been easy to go for a few hours each day and come home quickly to care for them. But what was the point? All I did was clean floors. I was as useless to the world as I was to my family. I tried to take Naja to the hospital, but the journey was too long and taxing. I brought her home, and she died that night. After Naja and the baby were gone, well, I don't remember much. I didn't leave my hovel, barely ate and slept, thought many times of taking my own life. Tempting though it was, I felt paralyzed by my own helplessness. The one thing that kept me sane was my radio. I never turned it off once. Even though I didn't listen to the words being said. In fact, I think the channel I got the clearest was in English, which I don't speak a lick of. But the voices, the music, the true knowledge that life existed beyond this violent city sustained me. I have no idea how much time passed before I saw the light of day again. I was dizzy from hunger, so finding food was my priority. My radio came with me, of course. It has gone everywhere with me. It talks to me as I sleep and as I wake. I don't know what it's saying, but I know I would die without it. Once I had some food and water, it occurred to me that the only thing left to do was go back to work. So I did. The following morning, I simply returned to school where I was the janitor and got back to work. Nobody made a big deal out of it. Like I said, Naja had been sick for a long time, and those who worked at the school knew it. I appreciated that no one had pestered me to come back to work during the hardest days of my life. The teachers never said much to me, but we smiled at each other in the halls, and that mutual respect was perhaps the reason I decided to come back at all. The place had gone to the dogs without me, so I simply grabbed my broom and rags from the closet and set to cleaning. Everyone is grateful to have me back, I know, and the best part is that nobody minds my radio. I bring it with me everywhere and keep the volume low enough not to disturb the students. No one has ever complained. In fact, I suspect they like it. The schoolhouse is not very big, but it does require a lot of maintenance. The floors are always sticky and stained, so I spend most of my time mopping. Kids make messes. I guess that's why I'm still in business. Sometimes I have to move things around and make sure I get every spot on the floor beautiful and clean. But I take pride in that. And the repairs. The school always needs tune-ups here and there, and I'm happy to help. Some days I'm reconstructing a desk that broke as I whistle along with the radio. Other times I handle more serious structural issues. Days when I have work like this, I feel truly instrumental, like a cog in a larger machine. How could this school survive without me? I took a long time, but once again I feel that I have purpose. There's a larder behind the school that is full of preserved food. In lieu of payment, I am allowed to take as much food as I need. That arrangement is fine. What would I do with money anyway? I used to bring the food back to my home, just one field away from the school, but when I started sleeping in the basement, no one seemed to notice. The school is so special to me that I can't leave it unguarded. When I'm besieged with memories of my wife and baby, I turn up the volume on my radio to drown out such thoughts. It works for me every time. Except this morning. Because this morning, I woke up to dead silence. I frantically examined the radio to see what had happened. I honestly cannot tell you how many days in a row I have been using it. Did it simply live out its life and die naturally? I've spent the entire day trying to fix it. Most of this time I have been crying. I'm losing my mind without it. I've given myself until sundown. If I cannot fix it by then, I'm going to take my life. I'm writing this because the sunlight is starting to die and I know what my fate shall be. I thought about taking one last walk through the halls of my school, saying goodbye to the students and their teachers. I know I will be missed, but I cannot bring myself to leave this room. I cannot go anywhere knowing that my radio is dead in here. There are no more tears in me. It feels now like I can't catch my breath. I vomited what little food I had in my stomach and I'm growing dizzy again, like it did after Naja died. I'm not long for this world. But before I take my life, I've closed the door to this room and stuck a chair beneath the handle. It's the only room in the basement, and it has a small casement that lets in just enough light to let me see what I'm doing. If anyone is kind enough to come looking for me, they should not be met with this gruesome sight. Perhaps they will see the door is blocked, smell my rotting body, and simply forget I ever existed. But I have placed both my radio and this note outside the door. Kind sir, if you are reading this, I have one humble request. Please fix it. Save my radio. It does not deserve to die in its sleep, and I am ashamed that I cannot revive it. Now I am ready to join Naja and little Ludmila in heaven. I hope this school can find another janitor who loves and cares for it the way I do. The hour is now. Do not forget my radio. When Mom zoomed back out, Olivia had tears in her eyes. Thank you for sharing, Uncle Stephen, Mom said, her voice choking. I think we've had enough. Wait, Olivia chirped. He said there's more. What did you find? Before Great Uncle Stephen could open his mouth, the image disappeared. My jaw dropped. Was that it? What did Great Uncle Stephen see? I promptly remembered that there was a second disc. This one was unmarked, but I hope it contained the rest of the interview. There was no video, only audio. The voice that started up was Olivia's. Hi, Miss Gertie. I'm sorry about my mom, but she refused to record the rest of what my uncle was saying, but I asked him to continue and secretly recorded the story as a voice memo on my phone. I remember you said earlier this year that history is written by the people who win wars. She sucked in her breath and commenced crying. But everyone's history is important, even if they are sad, pathetic people, and even if they've never won a single thing in their life. I haven't slept through one night since I finished this project, and you have to hear what my uncle has to say. There were tears in my eyes, too. The sincerity of her words were beautiful. I was also flattered that she remembered some trite phrase I threw around, because that's what my history teachers said to me. Before I got too sappy over it, the audio began again. Fine, came Mom's frustrated voice. If you want to hear the rest of the story, fine, but this is not appropriate for a school project. Let me finish, Great Uncle Stephen snapped. If it's too much for you, help yourself to a snack in the kitchen, but Olivia wants to know what happened. I heard her mother mumble something and walk away. Olivia and her uncle were alone. I imagined her looking at him expectantly. So did you find the radio? Or did it get ruined when the school got blown up? He rasped, and I heard the distinct click of a lighter. That letter, he began slowly, had a date on it. What date? She inquired hungrily. It was dated 2 weeks before we started rebuilding the school. Didn't you say the school had been destroyed like 2 years ago? Yes, replied Great Uncle Stephen. It had been. There was silence as I felt goosebumps on my arms. The images that came to my mind were almost too overwhelming to express, but Uncle Stephen had put them into words effortlessly. Clearly he has spent his whole life thinking about it. This man went into a vandalized, falling apart schoolhouse and cleaned up the blood and the rubble like it was spilt drinks and dust. He smiled at dead bodies in the hallway and believed that they were smiling back at him because they liked his radio. He moved around corpses so he could sweep the ground under them. The roof was half collapsed, so when it rained, he must have gotten soaking wet, but was so oblivious that he didn't feel a thing. I could hear Olivia crying steadily. I found the larder he was talking about. It was all pickled, preserved food that probably tasted like shit. Most of the stuff was moldy. Did you see the dead body? Yes, hanging from the ceiling, but it was amazingly lifelike. Like he wasn't rotting away. This hadn't happened years ago. Did he look peaceful? She asked, a chord of desperation in her voice. Couldn't tell you. The smell was rank, and his face was blue, and his eyes were bulging. Like this. I imagined him demonstrating. And the radio? I heard Great Uncle Stephen take a long drag of his cigarette. It was there all right. And it was still on. So that took a dark turn. Damn. Yeah. That's fucked up. That's super fucked up. That was a good one though. I feel like all three of them that we read today were like chef's kisses. So good. But anyway, I have rambled on for so long. I will let you guys go. But thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. Have a lovely rest of your day. And keep being the bad bitches that you are. Goodbye, guys.